Hi, everybody. Welcome to the morning show. We're broadcasting on Channel 9 and also coming to you on live streaming through Port Media's YouTube channel. Just go to www.ncmhub.org and click on the YouTube icon. I'm thrilled. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I'm thrilled this morning to be able to welcome our guest, Joe Uscinski. He's an associate professor at the University of Miami in political science. He studies public opinion and mass media with a focus on conspiracy theories, misinformation, and disinformation. He's the author of American Conspiracy Theories from Oxford University Press in 2014, and also the editor of Conspiracy Theories and the People Who Believe Them, also out from Oxford University Press in 2018. Joe, thank you so much for visiting the morning show. I really appreciate your taking the time to explain this to us.
Well, thank you. It's my
welcome.
pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Oh, great. Well, let's start with a definition, if we might. You've studied conspiracy theories and theorists. How would you define a conspiracy theory in contrast, say, to an unpopular or minority point of view on the one hand, or a diagnosable paranoid delusion on the other hand?
So a conspiracy theory is an accusatory perception in which a small group of powerful people are working in secret for their own benefit against the common good, and in a way that undermines our bedrock ground rules against the widespread use of force and fraud. And we know that this is just a theory and hasn't really happened, or we act as if it hasn't really happened because the relevant experts haven't put forward the data and the evidence saying that this is a real thing. So we know Watergate's real because we have the evidence. But if you think that Castro killed CIA or Castro killed Kennedy, then that's a conspiracy theory, right?
Yeah. Even your description, I was laughing because even your description of a conspiracy theory sounds conspiratorial. So thank you for that clarity. Yeah.
So there are a lot of things that get thrown into the conspiracy theory bucket, like Bigfoot and aliens and Loch Ness Monster, but those aren't small groups working in secret against us. Those are just sort of strange ideas that haven't amassed good evidence.
Yeah, okay. Useful distinction. Well, Joe, the next thing I wanted to find out was you've spent a lot of your professional life studying conspiracy theories. How did you get interested in doing this research?
Strange story, because I had a co-author who said, hey, let's do this thing. And at the time I said no. I said, no one cares about this topic. It's not relevant. And this was 10 years ago. And it was well off the beaten path of anything that journalists or political scientists or anyone else was paying attention to. But then once Trump came along and brought this sort of rhetoric into the White House and put it on the bully pulpit, then, all of a sudden what I was doing became a lot more relevant, largely because of the political circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a topic that found you and then drag you into the maelstrom, so to speak. Well, so getting to the heart of the matter, what is it, Joe, that draws people to conspiracy theories?
So I wish I could give you a very specific answer, like, oh, the person was dropped on their head when they were a kid, or they have some sort of they have a diagnosed mental problem or something like that. But that's not it. I mean, we all believe in one, if not a few, conspiracy theories, right? So when I poll on these, the more conspiracy theories I ask about on any given poll, the fewer and fewer people claim to believe in none of them. So presumably, as I ask about more and more, everyone becomes a believer, and everyone believes in one, if not a few. So, and we also have to understand too that conspiracy theory is a big bucket of ideas. There are lots of different conspiracy theories, and people will come to them for different reasons at different times. So, generally, what I'll say is there are a lot of factors that can drive people to any particular belief, and that's the same with anything, conspiracy theory or not. But in this case, what I tend to say is that people who believe a lot of conspiracy theories tend to do so because they have a worldview in which events and circumstances are most likely caused by shadowy conspiracies. So every new thing that happens, everything they see, it just makes sense to them to say, well, that's a conspiracy. Well, that must be a conspiracy behind that too. So, when COVID came out and, we get large numbers of people thinking that COVID is part of some conspiracy theory, but those people already believed the thing before that was a conspiracy and the thing before that and the thing before that. So, it's nothing new. It's just the same theories, different nouns.
So it's kind of an overarching kind of perspective on life, that new things that come along provide fodder for another iteration of that underlying kind of worldview.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Well, I read one article that posited a link between level of education and tendency to adopt conspiracy theories. Is that what your research bears out or not?
Yes, we that's exactly what we find. However, we don't exactly know why we find it. So it could be the case that people with more education are dissuaded from believing in conspiracy theories because of the good effects of education. As a professor and a professional educator, I would like to think that's the truth.
Yes, certainly.
But it could be going in the opposite direction. It could be the case that institutions of higher education eschew conspiracy theorists. So if I had a student who said, hey, I want to come work with you on a PhD dissertation about how Bush blew up the Twin Towers, I'd probably be like, no, I don't really want to work with you. So it could be going in both ways. It's the same thing with income. People with higher incomes tend to believe less conspiracy theories, but it could be that having more money makes you more comfortable, so you don't think everyone's out to get us. Or it could be that jobs that pay a lot of money aren't going to hire raving conspiracy theorists.
So there are variables that make it hard to. You can't prove causation because there might be other variables that are getting in the way that would lead to the same outcome. So
that's right.
That's interesting. Well, Joe, are there particular conditions socially, economically, or political type of worldview who are prone to thinking the world is largely made up of conspiracy theories? So are there some historical eras more prone to them than others, or are they pretty much always with us?
So it's tough to know in terms of historical era, because once you go back more than a few decades, we don't really have any polling to know. And at that point, we're just largely engaging with, historians who look at this episode or that episode or that episode, and we don't really have a standardized measure of precisely how conspiratorial people were at any given time. A lot of people think that now is the time. If you read the headlines, we're always falling off the conspiracy cliff. But journalists say that every year, and it can't always be true. I've been polling. I've been polling on this for about a decade in several ways, and here's what I can say, at least in the short term of one decade, is that we are not becoming more conspiratorial in our worldview, the U.S. as a whole. We are not more likely to believe in conspiracy theories now than we were some years ago. Belief in some are going up, belief in others are stagnant, belief in others is going down.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And it's not clear that there's any one cause for all of it. So when people say the internet is driving a new age of conspiracy theory, well, it's not clear that we're in a new age of conspiracy theory. It's not clear that conspiracy belief has gone up, and it's not clear that if it had, it would be due to the internet. So a lot of claims are made, but there's not a lot of evidence to back any of it up at this point. And what I would suggest is this: is that people are who they are over long periods of time, and that puts a lot of stability into our measures of public opinion.
Well, I find that reassuring. But it's also interesting because, as you were saying in the beginning, one gets the impression reading the headlines that conspiracy theories are being generated in a fast and furious way. So it's really interesting and sort of stabilizing and leveling for my state of mind to know that they pretty much are as they always have been. So thank you for that, Joe, about one of the more famous conspiracy theories being propagated right now, and that's QAnon, because it, to me anyway, seems so bizarre. And it's getting a tremendous amount of headlines right now, of course, because of the congressional candidate in Florida, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who attracted enough Republican votes to win her primary and was hailed by President Trump as a rising star of the Republican Party. But to hear what they believe, that they're cannibalistic pedophiles, Satan worshipers, and sex traffickers running the U.S. government, it just stretches credulity past, one would think, any reasonable bounds. So, Joe, I know there may not be a simple answer to this, but what's up with QAnon?
So QAnon is, as you point out, is really wacky, and it started in 2017 with the idea that Trump is fighting a satanic sex trafficking, baby eating deep state.
Yeah.
But let's put this in historical perspective. Ideas about baby eating and snatching have been around for millennia. And ideas about a deep state comprised of pedophiles working against the president is not new. That's the plot of Oliver Stone's movie JFK that came out 30 years ago. So none of this is new. This is all just recycled, rehashed stuff that's already out there. I mean, none of it's particularly creative. So if you look at it and forget all about history and all the conspiracy theories that came before it, then it can look really jarring. But when you realize this is just another in a long line of the same stuff getting rehashed, then it's quite normal. And I've been polling on it for the last 2 years. I found no evidence that belief or support for it is going up. It's actually one of the least believed things that I poll on. And despite the headlines, which frankly I think are either totally getting it wrong or at best are unevidenced in their claims, it's not going up. It's not becoming mainstream. This is not a mainstream belief that baby eaters are everywhere.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, it's just that some of the claims are fairly widespread on their own. It's just that QAnon adopted those claims and not the other way around. So the idea of a deep state is fairly widespread. The idea that political elites are corrupt is fairly widespread. But you can't take those ideas and then say, well, because 50% of the country believes in a deep state, all of a sudden they're all QAnon. No, that's not how this works.
Oh, that's really fascinating, Joe. And also thank you for the reassurance because it is easy to get the perception because of the headlines, which, as you put it, are not necessarily evidence-based, that something new and unprecedented is taking hold. That may be a conspiracy theory itself, as I say it.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, you can go online and you can find QAnon, and yes, there are Facebook pages and there's tweets, but those aren't necessarily the same thing as people or believers. And one thing we should have learned from 2016 is that not all internet activity is authentic.
That's right.
And it's not necessarily indicative of true public opinion out there. So when you see headlines saying there's a whole bunch of Facebook groups about something, well, the answer is so what?
Okay. This is so reassuring. Thank you, Joe. I feel calmer just talking to you. Well, you've mentioned Facebook pages, and I did want to ask you to expand a little bit upon the role of social media in either generating or spreading conspiracy theories. So especially ones regarding the pandemic and COVID, which has spread like wildfire, and in some cases with harmful consequences when they blot factual scientific information about how the virus is spread and proven ways to control it. So in your opinion and in your research, Joe, to what extent have social media and the internet been responsible for amplifying the reach and the power of conspiracy theories today?
To give the most simple answers is that they're not. I mean, people are going to communicate with whatever technology is available to them. And prior to the internet, it would have been books, radio, TV,
Mm-hmm.
or talking. People have been talking for a long, long time and spreading conspiracy theories that way. So we don't need the internet for this. And frankly, we don't even need to communicate in order to come up with our own conspiracy theories. I mean, a lot of people, because of their worldviews, when COVID happened, they just thought to themselves, this must be a conspiracy theory. They didn't need a tweet to tell them. They didn't need a Facebook page to tell them. And a lot of the things that really drive these beliefs aren't social media. It's the same old things that drive public opinion for seemingly forever. I mean, when the president comes on and says you can cure it with Lysol, or you could blast yourself with UV rays, or tells people they should drink fish tank cleaner, or says that the coronavirus is the Democrats' new hoax. That's not Twitter's fault. That's not Facebook's fault. That's the president. If you want to stop that rhetoric, you don't regulate Facebook. You get a better president.
All right. Okay. I was going to ask you what your thoughts were about, regulating, how to what extent you thought that Facebook, some Twitter, some of the big social media firms are responsible, what responsibility they have for monitoring the truth and accuracy of some of the conspiracy theories that do seem to spread.
I mean, if they want to, they should. But think about the irony. We're going to ask the government, who is spreading a whole lot of lies on their own,
yes,
to go in and regulate social media to make sure it's true.
Good point, Joe. There's a beyond irony. Yeah, to the level of contradiction. So,
and then the question is, well, if we're going to be puritanical about truth, why apply it only to conspiracy theories?
Okay.
I mean, because we have all sorts of alternative medicine claims, all sorts of religious claims, all sorts of things out there that people say that may not pass factual muster. Are we going to ban all of them? You know, and if not, why just certain things and not other things? It becomes very arbitrary. And then you wind up with censors having a lot of power to pick and choose what people can communicate.
Interesting points, Joe. Well, while we're still on the topic of social media, I was curious to find out if your research has looked, because I know you teach undergrads, and I wanted to find out, do you see differences generationally between attitudes of belief or skepticism for the internet and social media between older generations and younger generations that have grown up with the internet?
That's a tough question because it depends on the particular form that the misinformation takes. So older people have, tend to, what we found in 2016 was they were more likely to traffic in political misinformation than younger people. But at the same time, you could find instances where younger people are trafficking the new hip conspiracy theory, whatever that might be, on Twitter or TikTok or something like that. So it really depends on what we're focusing on. But I think I will say in general, everyone needs to get a refresher course in media literacy so that we can better identify good sources from lousy sources. And just beyond that, of being able to recognize good sources from not so good sources, we have to cultivate a willingness to actually value accuracy over things that just tell us what we want to believe.
Yeah. And I think also I talked to a librarian on the show a few weeks ago on the subject of how to think like a fact checker. And I think the other thing we all need a course on is to the extent to which every time we click on anything on our computer, it's being tracked, and what's regurgitated to us is what's referred to as our own private filter bubble. So, well, I was curious to find out, Joe, what are some conspiracy theories that have stood the test of time, and other ones are widely popular and have been sustained, predating the internet, ones that are so popular that generation after generation continues to adopt them?
JFK assassination theories. It only took a little while after the assassination for half the country to believe there was a conspiracy. And then that raised from about 50% to 80%, and it stayed there for decades. And only since the advent of the internet has it come down precipitously. So when I've been polling on it this year, we get around 45% believing in JFK conspiracy theories. But that's probably the perennial American conspiracy theory of our lifetimes is JFK.
And Joe, why do you think, two things, maybe curious hearing that, why do you think that was so widely believed? Why do you think it was so popular? And why did the numbers come down? That's pretty dramatic from 80% to 45%.
So I think there's been generational turnover. Like the students that I have now, they don't know who JFK is. And when
Yeah, of course.
I asked them 2 weeks ago, do you want to talk about 9/11? Most of them don't even, that doesn't register with them
That's
anymore.
interesting.
So it's sort of like believing in, McKinley conspiracy theories at this point. So,
which has very little meaning here.
Yeah, it would have very little meaning for us.
For those of us who don't time travel.
So it's one of those things where it's moving into the past, but you think about the reasons why it was such a big thing. Not only because it was a big event, but you had some weird circumstances surrounding it involving Jack Ruby, and then you had an entire culture built up around it. Hundreds of books were written. There were major motion pictures made about it. So the conspiracy theories almost became the historical account of it. So for most people, that seemed like the right thing to do is to adopt the conspiracy theory rather than the Warren Report line.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. And, it's interesting to think about the kind of the extinction of the popularity of some conspiracy theories just because history has a way of kind of becoming extinct as generations move on, unless we teach history in a more fulsome way than we tend to do. So that's really interesting.
Well, you would be surprised because we tend to focus on the conspiracy theories that last. And that gives us sort of a jaundiced view of conspiracy theories as a whole, because if we only think about the popular ones as representing those, the idea of conspiracy theory, then we're going to think they're all popular. But your median conspiracy theory comes and goes in the night. It pops up, somebody shares it, it doesn't catch on, it dies on the vine, and it's gone. And there's millions and millions of these. You could just go to Twitter at 3 a.m. and you'll find all sorts of weird theories that pop up. But by morning, they will not have come to fruition in any meaningful way. No one will have bought into it, and there'll be no movies, there'll be no books about it. So it's only a relative few that will really catch on the way JFK did.
That's really interesting, Joe, and also somewhat reassuring. So, in one of the articles you wrote that I read, you mentioned that some theorists speculate that conspiracy theories may have an evolutionary benefit for our species. They may be somewhat wired to form them. And I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more about why that would be. What would be the evolutionary benefit of a propensity to formulate and spread conspiracy theories? And is that something that makes sense to you personally?
It makes some sense to me, and it's hard to prove. But I mean, imagine 10,000 years ago, if you were walking through a field and you hear a rustle in the brush, you could assume that it's the wind, or you can assume that it's a tiger coming to eat you. If you assume it's the wind and it's the wind, then you're fine. If you assume it's the wind and it's a tiger, you get eaten.
Okay, right. So that's clearly a survival benefit.
Yeah, so there's a survival benefit now, but that survival benefit may be getting flipped on its head in modern societies, right? So whereas in the past it may have been beneficial to be very suspicious of outsiders or to be suspicious of anything and think the worst, to be very risk adverse. Now it may be the case that we are. Our risk aversion is causing damage, right? So if you think vaccines are a conspiracy, you're not going to get vaccinated, and we're going to have diseases come back that were cured 20 years ago.
Right.
So it could, I mean, that evolutionary mechanism could be, in fact, doing harm now.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that you explained that very well. It makes perfect sense. I see how what might have benefited us when the survival was very raw, wind, tiger. Now with something that says vaccines are more complicated. and requires a certain level of scientific sophistication to understand. So the formulation of a conspiracy theory that a vaccine is like a tiger,
Yeah.
you know, in effect, can flip its evolutionary advantage and actually lead to less health and a form of danger.
Yeah, that's the thing with modern societies. Vaccines are hard to understand. I'm not that kind of doctor.
Yeah.
So, I talk to my doctor when I get checked up and they tell me what to do and I listen to them.
Yeah.
So I don't have to do the hard mental work. I let other people do it for me.
That's right.
And that comes in the form of trusting, the consensus of experts.
Yeah, trust in expertise and in science, then, because the world is just too complicated for all of us to understand the many things we need to.
I mean, I'll give you a very quick story. Like, my wife was diagnosed with cancer a couple years ago. She's completely healthy now.
I'm glad to hear that.
She went through all the treatment, but when we were apart at the time, and she got her cancer diagnosis, and the first thing you do is to Google it.
Of course.
So she Googled it, and all sorts of nonsense came up about how she should tape onions to her hands and feet, how she should eat, barrels of turmeric every day, and that will cure the cancer. And if you're someone who's in that position who just got a scary diagnosis, I mean, that stuff sounds like, why do chemo when I can eat turmeric? But she went to the doctors, and now she's cured. And some of this stuff takes advantage of people when they're at their most vulnerable. And we're lucky here at University of Miami. We have an incredible cancer center, the Sylvester Cancer Center, and this is one of the stories I always tell, because don't fall for the fake stuff. Go to the real experts.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Well, I'm glad your wife is well, by the way. And I'm glad she didn't opt for the turmeric.
Yeah.
So,
well, I told her, I said, if you start taping onions to your hands and feet, there's going to be a problem for the marriage.
Yeah, there you go. That too. Well, I'm keen to ask you this because of course, I'm in Massachusetts, home of Salem, and I've just booked a guest for my show a few weeks from now. They're having a new exhibit at the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem on the Salem witch trials coming up, and I booked somebody to come on and talk about the Salem witch trials. And so I've been keen to ask you, Joe, if you would view something like the hysteria, I may be prejudging it to call it hysteria, but would you describe the belief in witches that led to the Salem witch trials and as a conspiracy theory, one with violent consequences for its scapegoats, or is that a different kind of phenomenon?
No, it's very similar, and in the sense that people thought that these supposed witches were conspiring with Satan to bring harm to the colonies, and you see the same thing now. Like, some of the theories about Hillary Clinton are very Salem witch trialish. Like, she's eating babies for their magical powers, and she's some sort of satanic sex trafficker, and so it's not different. It's just the same stuff getting rehashed over and over again. So I do consider that to be very much like a conspiracy theory. I mean, I will say too, I have visited Salem during the fall before Halloween years ago. It's an incredible experience. I'm from New Hampshire, so.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask you about was in one of your articles, you talk about researchers in political science and psychology finding that the motivations for believing or disbelieving conspiracy theories has to do with less to do with the method of communication than it has to do with the currency of what's called motivated reasoning. And that phrase caught my attention, and I was hoping that you could explain what you mean by motivated reasoning and how it serves as a filter for our perceptions, either consciously or unconsciously.
So a simple way to think about it is that people believe what they want to believe. And when presented with evidence that cuts across their beliefs, then they'll find a way to reason it away. Right. So, like a most extreme example, you'll often, when some serial killer gets sentenced to life in prison, the mother will show up and say, well, he's such a good boy. Well, no, he's not. He's a serial killer.
No, yeah.
But the mother finds a way to reason away all the murders and say he's a great guy. But we all do this to some extent in less drastic ways. You know, when the other party does something that we don't like, we say, oh my God, that's the worst thing you could ever do. And then when our party does it, they say, well, it's justified and we're all right.
Right.
So we pick and choose, what evidence matters to us. We pick and choose, what good and bad is based on who's doing it and their relation to us. So people are very good. And the problem is, even very smart people, they become very good at motivated reasoning. So they know how to reason away any evidence that tells them what they don't want to hear.
Yeah. So motivated reason is a very specialized form of rationalization and compartmentalization. In other words.
So if there's what we find with conspiracy theories, people do this very well. So if there is somebody who you don't like, it's very easy to accuse them of being behind the conspiracy. So you find that we're always accusing the same people of doing stuff because we just don't like them. And we're able to find a way to reason them as the villain of whatever conspiracy theory.
Yeah, makes sense. Absolutely. Well, I know that you teach undergrads a class on conspiracy theories. And in one of your articles, I read about a really interesting exercise that you assigned the students to demonstrate how these theories simulate research. So I was hoping you could talk to us about the exercise that you gave your students and the results, because I found that really fascinating, Joe.
So as we get to the end of the class, I ask students to all make up their own conspiracy theory. And I say the wackier the better, but make it up and then go to the internet and evidence it. So find all the evidence you can to support this made up conspiracy theory. And they come up with things that have, robots and aliens and all sorts of crazy things going on. And then they have to trade it with another student who then has to debunk it. And then what happens is I'll ask all the students to stand up. They discuss the conspiracy theory they debunked and then say why they don't believe it. At which point the student who made up the conspiracy theory often gets offended because they've bought into their own conspiracy theory and they can't believe anyone would buy it. And I have to tell them, well, you made it up, you made it up. But it's sort of one of those things they get into it and then they start to feel, certain sort of pride in this theory and they almost buy in.
That's so interesting. So they've made it up themselves, but they get involved in their own motivated reasoning to support it then.
And what's sort of interesting is that people can, what it also demonstrates is that you can make up any crazy idea and find quote unquote evidence for it on the internet.
Yeah. So after the class, then what are the results? What are the students? Does it change their attitudes toward conspiracy theories, even the ones they themselves formed?
So generally what they'll say is, because of this class, I don't believe conspiracy theories anymore.
All right. Okay.
A lot of them a lot of them see the title of the class. So I get a lot of students who are really into it because they are believers.
Oh, they think you're going to be teaching them the truth about 9/11 or JFK.
Yeah, like we're going to go out and catch the conspirators in this class or something like that. And they quickly realize that's not what we do. But by the end of it, they're like, all these beliefs I had before, I just don't buy into.
Well, it's a good work,
Joe. That's not my intent, but that's what happens.
That's really interesting. And it relates to something else that I wanted to ask you about, which has to do with, as you've made clear, all of us are susceptible to some degree of conspiracy theorizing in our lives. It's a matter of continuing with extremes. Some of us may see ourselves as moderates, but we may know extremists. You've talked about the experience of getting into cabs with people who are cab drivers who are experts on the CIA somehow magically. So I wanted to find out, what do we do with people we might know who are enthralled to conspiracy theories? Do we try to reason with a conspiracy theorist, build a case, or just agree to disagree? What's to be done? Especially, sometimes conspiracy theories can incite scapegoating or other forms of
Yeah.
unpleasantness. So what's the best policy here?
So sympathy and empathy go a long
Mm,
way.
mm,
We're all trying to make sense of a dizzying world, and
mm-hmm.
it's never easy.
Yeah.
Um, we're not going to solve any of these problems by sending someone a link or
Uh,
giving them some factoid. And this goes the same for conspiracy theories and anything else. You're not going to put a Republican and a Democrat in a room together and have them, convince the other. Or a
yeah.
Jewish person, a Catholic aren't going to come out,
Yeah.
having switched the other after one conversation. So
Uh-huh.
people have fairly strong worldviews, and they're not going to give them up based on one conversation with someone. So we have to treat each other with respect.
Mm-hmm.
I think being gentle in how we approach
Mm,
people is often the best thing. But I will say this: you're exactly right that some of these beliefs do lead to scapegoating. There are plenty
mm-hmm.
of examples through history where people have been severely harmed
Mm-hmm.
um, because of conspiracy theories, or conspiracy theories played a major role in
Yeah.
terrible, terrible historical outcomes.
Yeah.
Um, so we want to make sure that we're making sure that people get good information,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're not being drawn into uh, you know racist scapegoating that
Yeah.
attacks the most vulnerable among us,
Yeah.
because that's very dangerous.
Yeah. But your suggestion of in general approaching with kindness and gentleness seems very wise to me. It reminds me, of course, Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been much in the news the last few days, and she talked about
Mm.
leading people in such a way that they want to follow you, which I think what you were saying made me think of, and it seems to me like extremely wise advice. Well, just a couple of concluding questions then, Joe. Do you think conspiracy theories will always be with us, or can you foresee changes somehow that would lead to their diminishing or disappearing altogether?
They'll always be with us. Whether they are so prominent in our politics remains a question. I think if we get a president who is not so engaged with conspiracy theories at some point in the future, then things will change on that front. When our political elites stop engaging with this sort of stuff,
Mhm.
their influence and salience will be greatly
Yeah.
diminished.
Mhm.
Not good for my career, but good for society. So I'll root for it.
Well, you can switch to the history of conspiracy theories.
Yeah, it'll be the history then. Yeah.
And I'm guessing that you're probably good until retirement, at least, Joe.
I think just the amount of material that's been amassed in
Yeah.
the last few years is enough to keep going.
Well, I also wanted to ask you as we finish, what are you currently working on or writing about?
So the big thing I'm focusing on right now is QAnon, and just polling that over time, which I've been doing
Yeah.
for the last couple of years, and then polling on it in different ways, to sort of pick apart what these beliefs really are and what they really represent.
Yeah. Well, we'll all look forward to the results of that. Will that be an article or a book, do you think? Or
A couple articles, and then
okay.
the big plan is to have that big popular press book come out in about a year or two, and so I'll let you know when that's coming.
You have a standing and open invitation to come back and educate us further, Joe.
Well,
Joe,
thank you.
this has been just wonderful. It's so interesting to have you come on the show, and I really appreciate your taking the time to do it. It's really great. You're fascinating, and your work sounds really important. So thank you very much, Joe, for
Well,
coming
thank you
and
very
visiting the
much.
morning show.
It's my
Thank you so
pleasure.
much. All right, you take care now, and we'll
Bye.
have you back.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, bye now. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you'll join us next Thursday on the morning show. If you missed any of today's show, it'll be available for viewing on Port Media's YouTube channel playlist for the morning show. Just go to www.ncmhub.org and click on the YouTube icon. Each show will also air on WJOP FM 96.3 on Friday at 8 a.m. and the following Tuesday at 4 p.m. and Wednesday at 3 p.m. as well, and will be available as a podcast on the SoundCloud. Just again, go to www.ncmhub.org and scroll down. Click on the cloud icon. Thanks, everybody.